In the fourth industrial revolution, data is the new oil, the new currency. Economics is no longer defined in purely financial terms, but also in terms of data. Despite this, today our society faces a general lack of access to data sets, to data services, for research, for insight, for survival. In data ethics, we call this data poverty. Enter Cat Cortes and the Open Data Charter. Welcome to Data Ethics Conversations. In this conversation, we talk to Cat Cortes, Communications Lead of the Open Data Charter, an international NGO that seeks to make data open and freely accessible while protecting the rights of people and communities. We will talk to Kat about her journey into open data, the mission of the Open Data Charter, and the promise that open data holds for the future of governments and society. If you enjoy this podcast, please like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitter at EthicsPH, and on LinkedIn at DataEthicsPH. And now, my conversation with Cat Cortes.
Hi, Dominic. Hi, everyone. So I was going to dive straight into the Open Data Charter and what we do, but I would like to, I guess, give context also in terms of my open data journey and data journey in general. So I have been working in the development space for a while. It's been most of my career, starting at the Singapore Committee for UN Women, and mostly in comms. I actually got into open data through, or while working at the Singapore, the High Commission, the British High Commission, BHC, of Singapore. And there was a guest that came in kind of talking about how he led the project, the Open Data Project in the UK for the UK government, and open up data in governance and policy. And that really intrigued me, being the data internet geek that I am a little bit. I was kind of intrigued, growing up, I'd always believed in, the whole kind of thinking that the internet democratizes or will, right, is the great equalizer, blah, blah. So kind of knowing that there were some governments really leading the charge and being transparent with their data, or at least sharing it openly, excited me. And that's how I found myself here with the Open Data Charter. I work remotely based in Singapore, but most of the team is actually based in, at one point, London, but now LATAM. So that's Argentina and Mexico. So a little bit more background about how the Open Data Charter started. We were actually founded at the margins of the United Nations General Assembly in 2015. So at that time, there were a lot of questions in terms of the progress of open data, right? It had been close to a decade when the movement kind of first began, and everyone in governance and policy was trying to understand the value add of open data and where we were falling short. The Open Data Charter principles were set about by a few key governments that were present, as well as civil society organizations. Some of the governments present at the time was United Kingdom, Mexico, Canada. And I mean, if you're familiar with OpenGov, they are one of the kind of main advocates and players still to this day. So in terms of our objectives and priorities lately, one of our main principles is to make sure that data is open by default. That's first. Where we are presently, we've kind of honed in on the fact that, moving beyond more data, more information, and kind of that, I guess, misconception, right, that's better. We're focusing on publishing with purpose. So, we look at key issues, policy issues, concrete challenges. And lately our focus areas are data rights and anti-corruption, climate action, pay equity, and Yeah. Yes, that's it.
Yeah, so going back to your, I mean, it's interesting that this thing started with the UN and then you guys picked it up.
Yeah.
Just how, I don't know, how mainstream is the concept of open data? I mean, in the world, or at least as far as you guys are concerned back in Singapore, is it kind of an alien concept still to some countries? Like I know the Philippines struggles with open data for sure.
100%. It is still. So currently with the Open Data Charter, we have about 150, uh, 150 governments and civil society organizations that are signed up to us. And actually, most recently, Uzbekistan joined us on a national level. They are the 23rd government, I believe. So in terms of open data, I guess as a trend, I would say that we are coming to this new wave of it. But definitely because we are still harping on about openness in general, and being open and or having data open by default is still kind of one of the main things that we talk about. It is 100% not as popular as we'd like. And yeah, so anyone that is interested in kind of talking to us about joining the ODC and our chats, please do contact us as well. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe later we can share how they can sign up
Yes.
or talk about. Yeah, so one of the things that you were kind enough to share was your kind of your open data charter,
Mhm.
and maybe what I'll do is I'll flash it briefly on the screen so people have something to look at. So anyway, one of the things that I was really curious about,
Mm.
and this is something that I think people will find online, right, on your website,
Mhm.
is you straight up talk about risks, right,
Yes.
or maybe the misconceptions about open data that people have. So can you talk a little bit about these risks, or how did you guys start? Is this something that you encountered on the field, or something that you kind of know by default when getting into the space?
So, I mean, I think it's very big, right? There's a lot of things that we can talk about, but some of the things that I think in terms of COVID, in light of COVID, that has been very important, and I think it is propelling conversations. It is that the issue of privacy, right? There's a lot of kind of talks, or the question that we most get actually is like, but what if someone misuses it, right? Why open it up? Someone will misuse it. But for us, that's not the question that we want to begin with. We want the citizens. We want people to have access to the data, and I think that's again things that most governments and most societies struggle with. But we promote that. We want access to the government, and then of course we want to then look into the local contexts, into the specific contexts in terms of risk. So again, going back to the COVID example, many countries are struggling with but how does this impede on the rights or the privacy of the person? And of course that's 100% important, and that's kind of why again we were talking about the framework of publishing with a purpose. You look at the problem and then you kind of hone in to how are you going to use that data? How will you be protecting citizens' rights? How are you going to protect their privacy? And in what emergency situation, is that information actually useful or necessary to help the greater good or the community? Yeah, so that's we can go we can chat more about that, but I think COVID context is definitely Philippines, you can enlighten me with what's happening, because I'm actually quite in the dark lately. But here in Singapore, definitely in terms of our apps, that has been a question raised by the citizens.
Well, I'll of course, most of our listeners are from the Philippines. I'm sure it wouldn't be too controversial if I said that I don't think, especially in light of COVID, I don't think the government really has a good sense of like the balance between openness and privacy. Like for example, you have situations where the Freedom of Information Act,
Mm.
uh, people are denied their request, on the basis of privacy, like, requesting for statements of assets and liabilities of politicians, although that's a bit political.
Right.
That's supposed to be open to the public, all the way down to requesting police statistics, just like, for example, verifying the death count, like in the extrajudicial killings. It's politically, loaded, but it should be open information.
Yes.
And then on the flip side, when, for example, if I, until very recently, if I wanted to buy a coffee from Starbucks, or anywhere, and during like community quarantine, we have to fill up these little forms with basically our personal information, like a telephone number, address, our
Right.
names, and then give that information to the merchant before we even get into the premises, without any guarantee or assurance that that information was, is going to be secured and taken care of, all for the sake of contact tracing, which,
Right.
honestly, I haven't seen any real evidence that that information has been successfully used for contact tracing. So you see these two weird situations coexist,
Yeah.
at least in the Philippines, where
Yes.
data that should be open is being held back on the basis of privacy, question mark.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, privacy is the first to go, just because you want to do contact tracing, and yet it hasn't really been proven that the contact tracing has actually been effective. I'm abstracting it like really extremely, just to show the
Yes,
kind of
100%.
the situation, no? So yeah, I don't know. Do those things exist in Singapore as well? And how are you guys appreciating this from an open data charter perspective?
So from our perspective, that's actually how we've moved forward in terms of our objectives and also our priorities. We really want to work with more privacy advocates, and of course, even data ethics. It's not our our expertise, I think that's another misconception, right? That one organization will solve the problems. Not at all. It is, and I think even more relevant now, with this whole kind of pandemic and us suffering together, we realize that, right? That communities are important. Talking, all of these just discussions that we have, again, open discussions that we have, is very important. So for us, it's not just an isolated approach, right? We are very keen to work with different types of organizations in the data space, not just open data, focused, or rather civil society organizations that are, just talking about data. No, we want to talk about privacy. We want to talk about human rights, inclusivity, and yeah. So it's a spectrum. I completely agree. I think it's difficult. It's already difficult that in real life situations we have this dichotomy, as we see in a lot of countries, right? Or even that mindset in governments, within governments, but it should be open. Yeah, it should be open, and it should be a spectrum. And again, committing to what specific issue are we looking at in a certain context, right? Or else, yeah, it will become very difficult. So yeah.
Can you maybe just to give an idea of, because the term data ethics hasn't been around for for a very long time.
Yeah.
The concept probably has been around for a long time, but as a term,
Yes.
people haven't really been talking about it. And I think in parallel to that, as one of the verticals of data ethics is also open data. Maybe for the benefit of our listeners and our viewers, can you share some milestones you've achieved in your organization in terms of bridging open data and let's say gender pay gap, for
Right.
example,
Yes.
or some of these other social issues?
So I'd mentioned that our main focus areas are data rights and anti-corruption, climate action, and pay equity. And more specifically, I think when talking about ethics, I like this. I found this quote. I found this quote that I really like. Ethics is nothing else than reverence for life. Albert Schweitzer. And that got to me. I think that was from a mailing list of all the data ethics things that I get. But I think we forget that, right? That and I know it's been discussed so many times, but I like repeating it because I think we should be thinking about the people, right? And with Open Data Charter, we don't think of data in terms of this kind of abstract. We always like to think that people are behind the data, and it's very people centered. So in terms of our focus areas, some of the resources that we have in the branches that I talked about, for example, in anti-corruption, we actually have open up guides. That's one of our main resources that we have available for governments, which highlight different high-value data sets that can allow governments to investigate corruption. And then more recently, we published the climate action guides as well. So yeah, that's how we look at it. It's data would be nothing if there would be no data if there were no people, and also we should be upholding the fundamental rights of the individual. That's still very much our beliefs.
Yeah. So how does Open Data Charter normally engage? Like, do you go directly to the government, or do you have some sort of community oriented activities? I mean, how just for the benefit of our viewers.
Yeah, so we actually, many ways. So me as a comms lead, I have Google alerts on certain governments that are exploring open data, and I get very excited because right now, as I mentioned, most of our team sits in LATAM, so Argentina and Mexico, and of course we have our existing government adopters. But in terms of where I'm located and we're actually trying to reach right now is Southeast Asia and Africa, so that we have more discussions like this. Yeah, but so for me, Google alerts, but we also have our network. We have our implementation working group, which we've invited you to join. And also, please, if anyone wants to join, we do have kind of these working groups where we discuss all things open data, particularly in governance. We also have key partners, of course, that then, kind of introduce us to governments that are, so it's our network. We have an existing network, but in terms of, I guess, my role, I do kind of look out and make sure that governments who are kind of exploring open data and who've spoken about it in the media are connected to us. Yeah. So
in terms of shaping mindsets, I mean, a big part, I would assume a big part of your work in Open Data Charter is changing a perspective related to data or or the openness of it. I mean, do you have like specific levers or specific, concepts that you start with whenever you're trying to evangelize, let's say, a government or community regarding open data?
I think that's what we don't do. We don't really evangelize. I think it's already the data space is already so populated, right? And the open data space as well has kind of specific goals, specific objectives. Where we sit, we kind of are very aware of our limited, our very small team, first of all, and resources. So we do kind of work with existing collaborations and open up to new introductions in terms of kind of broadening our scope or broadening our audience. So in that sense, I think it would be, it wouldn't be representative of us to say that we advocate so much as we work with governments that are interested in it. And, that's the thing. It can start with a government employee that comes to us and is like, oh, how do I present this to my team? And, this can be in, whether it's energy, the department, a very kind of, it doesn't have to be policy, but, it just, actually, they all sit in different government departments. So it could just be an employee who works closely with a high level government representative that is then, interested, how can I, how can I evangelize or convince? And then we do provide some resources, but I think in terms of us pushing, yeah, that's it's a lot of work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, talk a little bit about the governments who approached you. I mean,
Yes.
who are interested. I
Yes.
mean, do you what are normally their motivations, or like you talked about Uzbekistan. I
Yes.
mean, what's their story?
So their story is, we actually just launched a blog about it, but that they've had a kind of a long journey with open data, and it's kind of an on-off one. And I think that's a great thing to highlight, that, it's not easy, right? Committing to transparency. And that's usually where a lot of these governments come from. It is to kind of really push for transparency and openness within their governments, within their government offices. Um, it's not kind of a straight road. It is a winding road. And we very much see that, and we recognize that. But it's really amazing when governments do commit, and you see them really become advocates themselves for open data, and then everyone kind of seeing the value of it. So with Uzbekistan, it was very much that they already had an open data portal, actually, I think a few years ago, I believe. And it kind of, fell by the wayside, or just wasn't put at the forefront, or that, they didn't have they weren't able to create robust frameworks around the open data portal and the management. But now they've kind of put their focus and sights back to that, and are very much on board to make sure that their policies are open data friendly, and still putting people at the forefront of their work.
All
So
right.
it's great. Yeah.
I'm just browsing the site right now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you definitely have a lot of resources related to climate action. So you want to talk a little bit about that. So what's the story between climate change and open data?
So with that, again, our main resource is an Open Up guide. So with the anti-corruption Open Up guide, again, those are high value data sets that can help governments investigate on how to combat corruption. With climate change, it's the same. We have high value data sets that can help governments kind of look into what data can promote climate action. And it's, I think the first country is a LATAM country that has kind of implemented this. So it's quite new, and we are going to kind of talk about it more at the Open Data Week, New York City Open Data Week. So I invite everyone to join us, join our interim director, executive director, who will talk more about that.
Do you also facilitate kind of let's say in a government that does not have an open data initiative? How do you, I mean, do you have ways of opening them up, or so is it this Open Up guide? I mean, is that covered here? I mean, how do you normally get, I mean, it's one thing to have a government that's actually interested, but they haven't done it yet. But what about a government who's like completely clueless? I'm just abstracting.
Oh yeah, no.
Completely
Which
clueless. I don't know.
exists.
Yeah. So I'm sure there are a couple of those. How do you activate them?
So we actually do have seminars, and we, feel free to invite us to kind of introduce you to our resources. But mostly they're casual conversations. They begin as emails, or kind of, again, introductions through the grapevine, or even through our implementation working group. Not everyone is necessarily a government adopter or a CSO endorser. We are very open to conversations. We're a very small team, so very friendly. Feel free. But yeah, in terms of kind of, I guess, official implementation or discussions, we do have seminars or workshops where we teach governments how to use our Open Up guides. Yeah.
In your kind of like, just put ourselves in the shoes of a government, like, okay, we're going through a workshop.
Yes.
Can you point to maybe a couple of like I wouldn't say problems, like common roadblocks that they struggle with in terms of
Oh, yes.
And it can be anything, right? It can be
Yes.
infrastructure, it can be mindset. So I mean, what are like common stumbling blocks for governments looking to get into like an open data program?
So common roadblocks that we've seen is who is the data steward, or where does the data sit, or where does the program sit? And I'm sure that's kind of that's yeah, we're all familiar with that, where a government will take ownership of a project, and I this is what happens to most open data projects within governments, is that a team leads with it and then drops it or doesn't know where to put it, doesn't know how to move forward. And that's also something that we are very cautious about, right? You start an open data project, and if it's just kind of there but not used, reused, and yeah, that's also something that we're kind of we hope doesn't happen, right? We take caution in that. But yeah, one very common one is the ownership, maybe data ownership, and obviously that term is loaded, so I'm cautious to say that. But yeah, where does who stewards the data, which department, right? Who is responsible for it? Who will be held accountable for it? So that's often the case. Sometimes there's, I would say, debates within our workshops of,
Are they
yeah.
contentious debates, really like livid type discussions?
I would say yes. A lot of finger pointing happens, and that's why we try to keep it very friendly and open. Again, we mitigate these these bickerings, internal bickerings.
Right. In your experience, is there a typical government agency who would kind of own the open data initiative, or like the equivalent in the Philippines?
Mm.
I don't know if it's still the DICT, the Department of Information and Communication Technology, or there's the PCOO, because
Mhm.
they kind of own the Freedom of Information Initiative. But
Right.
even those two agencies don't seem to be talking to each other. So like in like
There.
some of the
That's
best, I mean,
yeah.
in the countries whom you dealt with, who would normally kind of own that or drive that?
So that's exactly, I think, part of the common problems or roadblocks is that okay, you find the owner, but then they don't talk to each other, or it's again not shareable, reusable within departments. It's very different with each government, I would say, right? Structurally, and in terms of, again, what purpose the Open Data Project, the purpose of the Open Data Project and what it's used for. I, 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 I couldn't say with confidence, the where it should sit, but we do talk about data upskilling in general a lot within in our workshops, and just in conversations as Open Data Charter. We believe that all kind of public officials should have data skills now at some point, and I think I'm in the I'm preaching to the choir in that sense. It really, it's a difficult question because different governments work differently. Again, and when they pursue an open data project, they have a specific purpose, right? But that's where, again, data upskilling is super, super important. Let's start small. Let's make sure that our civil servants and our public officials actually know, right, that they are stewards of data, or should be, and how can they be better stewards of it? What does that mean? Yeah.
In terms of like, okay, you talk about the risks, right? But have
Mm.
you seen kind of like breakthrough like milestones from some governments who have adopted open data? Like one area that we're very passionate about is, if you have open data, it kind of unlocks innovation as well, because then you have
Yes.
data for citizens to use, and they can use it for thinking of new ways to optimize things, to improve things, not just with public services, but maybe some new technologies and new problems that they can solve using open data. So have there been examples of that in your experience?
Yes, 100%. So I mean, there's the exhaustion from this word, but COVID, COVID kind of presented a lot of very, I guess, forward-thinking governments in terms of open data and its use in the context of COVID. One government in particular, and we I think everyone's singing praises about them in the data space in general is New Zealand, of course. I don't know if it's been talked about enough on your show, but in terms of COVID mitigation and using open data, they actually have a list of just multiple uses of it from I believe there was even employment. Yeah, so it's not just kind of COVID and pandemic preparedness in that context, but also kind of helping citizens in terms of employment. There's just so many, there's that, and that's kind of getting very creative already with it, right? When you think of just COVID, it's like, oh, how yeah, contact tracing and like the usual, but no, you can use it for public transportation. You can use it for, again, climate change and kind of looking into what your government is doing in terms of contracts, right? Things like that. So New Zealand, in the context of COVID, it has been amazing. There's also Canada. And actually, one of our kind of main projects that we're going to launch soon is a COVID data taxonomy and pandemic preparedness. If there are data practitioners out there that want to kind of share with us their thoughts, I will be shooting the link somewhere at some point, but we're publishing that soon. It's actually, so there's two parts to it. One part of the project is policy recommendations, COVID-19 or pandemic preparedness policy recommendations. And the other one is a data taxonomy specifically for pandemic preparedness, where we worked with a team out in Panama to kind of look at, I believe it was 24 countries. I may be wrong with that exact figure, but how or what kind of data they looked at in terms of pandemic preparedness. And I'm very, very excited about that. And we want that framework to be used by governments as a starting point in terms of future pandemic preparedness. Because again, nobody saw this coming and different governments responded to it differently. But we hope that with this resource, that it will be useful, that kind of governments can go like, oh, these are the types of data that we need, and et cetera. And again, that's why data upskilling is going to be important. What use are these resources if our public servants have no clue? Yes. So
Yeah,
we're hopeful.
upskilling is definitely a big factor. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you're aware, but in my capacity as part of the Analytics Association of the Philippines, which is definitely another group that I'd love to put in touch with Open Data Charter.
Oh, that's amazing.
One project that we're currently working on is a project called Sparta with the Department of Science and Technology, and it's actually a three-prong kind of initiative. One is we're providing MOOCs, so online courses. It's free for those who will qualify for the scholarship. Most people can get in. And the goal is to train 30,000 data professionals. Whether, if you're from everyone from data steward all the way up to data scientists, data engineers. That's another thing that we were also particular about, is that there's no one single data professional. There's not a one size fits all.
Not at all. Yes.
Yeah. So we said first, let's start training people in kind of the data skills, and it's good that I think you're the only other person outside the AEP who I've heard mention the term data steward. So here's the website.
Oh, that's great.
So we have a partner, Course Bank PH. They're the learning management system, and yeah. So these are the six the career paths, and then so training is one part for sure. But the other two parts are actually interesting, because another part is actually open data. So we're helping build, at least for DOST and DAP, an open data portal, which is separate from like data.gov.ph, which exists already. But
Right.
this one is being incubated within Sparta. And the idea
Oh,
is, all of these skill sets we're giving people would be useless if they didn't have the data to use. So I think that's kind of the flip side to your problem, where all of
yeah.
these data would be useless if you didn't have people who had the skills. And
Yes.
then the
Yeah.
third prong would be kind of R&D projects,
Mm,
hackathons, research and development, to encourage people to, okay, now that you've learned something from Sparta, why don't you use the open data that we will hopefully be gathering, and
mm.
then address all of these societal issues, right?
Excited.
Is there anything that sounds like this in kind of your network, or have there been countries that have been also looking at like mass training of people?
Yes. So I actually, so here in Singapore, there, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the smart city kind of, I mean, in general, right? Most cities were aiming to be smart at some point, and then I think those projects fell by the wayside. But Singapore was very committed to being a smart city, and I am not sure the date, but there was a point where the government actually they funded the upskilling of maybe tens of thousands of people as well. So yes, I think I'm super excited for the Philippines, the Philippines being my birth country, that this is going to happen. But not only Singapore, but I mean, you may be familiar with the Open Data Institute. They provide that kind of even not just for governments necessarily, but like really open internationally, and that's what's been kind of enlightening to me as someone who wasn't in the open data space and then coming in, really seeing how open data uh, institutions and organizations and people are really keen to kind of tap into anyone from any field, which I think is great, right? Being in very specific development spaces, I think you kind of tend to again put yourself in isolation, or but when we talk about data and open data, again, because of the principle of openness and our beliefs, it is really great to see that there is more of that. And I really wanted to highlight something you said about the one size fits all. I think most people are now embracing that, right? That there's no such thing. Context is everything. We have to look at every, whether it's policy, whether it's situation, whether it's a person's life, right? That we should be looking at it at the lens of what's happening here exactly, and not make kind of just assumptions, frameworks that are not relevant to the person, etc. So
Yeah, I wanted
it's
to.
exciting.
You mentioned the Open Data Institute. I'm very, very familiar with their work.
Yes.
I'll share this. In fact, some of the early ideas that led to Data Ethics PH came from kind of browsing the
Oh,
Open Data Institute. So they were one of the first, as far as I know, to have
yes.
published on like a data ethics canvas.
Yes.
And although I think the target for this, I don't know if it's necessarily governments, probably private sector. So I was still working in private sector at that time.
Yeah.
So I found it really, really compelling that, hey, look, some people are really looking at data ethics. And although this, I would say, covers more of the data handling side of ethics,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting, even within the data ethics space, it seems to be kind of branching out into kind of at least three directions. One area is data handling, which covers
That's
open
right.
data privacy, confidentiality, security, and anonymizing, personally identifiable information. So that's all handling.
Yeah.
Then there's another branch on research ethics, like people
Yeah.
who kind of, if you're going to do experiments using open data or any data for that
Yes.
matter, make sure that it's replicable. So the openness of the methodology. I think
Mhm.
we've seen that in COVID. Depending on who you
Yeah.
ask, sometimes the methodology is being used by, let's say, statisticians and scientists to kind of come up with conclusions or forecasts, isn't really that open. Or maybe when you open it, you kind of find that the methods are really wonky.
No,
In
it's
fact, that was one of our earlier podcasts actually, and like the responsibility inherent in it. So yeah, research ethics. And then the third, probably the noisiest, ironically, but it's something more like, I don't think it's an immediate problem yet for the Philippines, for example, is the area we would call AI ethics.
Yes.
Like how do
Right.
you police algorithms? How do you deal with, discrimination on, facial recognition, or disinformation by AI driven disinformation on Facebook. I mean, that's another broad space developing kind of on its own. So it's a really broad, canvas for us to assume all of that, to be honest. So it's really great to be able to link up with, organizations such as yourselves.
I actually,
Yeah.
so can I just chime in because I'm super excited when you brought this up. It links to our Published with a Purpose canvas, which was based on the data ethics canvas by the ODI as well. So let me just see if I can share this. Yeah, yeah. So we have our own canvas. Are you able to see the whole thing? Yeah,
Yeah. Published with a purpose. Fantastic.
there you go. Yes. So this specifically kind of in the context of governments, again, thinking about their data challenges, and then the people involved, right? Who gets impacted? What are the department's data needs, et cetera, et cetera. So this, again, yeah, it's been great. I think, that's the thing with the openness principle, right? There's more collaboration, and as you said, innovation, creativity, that kind of I guess just like compassion and kindness, that we can adapt resources, we can share resources, we can specify resources, right? Because again, not every data ethics canvas will fit a certain situation, and more specifically for us, because we work with governments, yeah, there are different questions involved, and like you said, I think ODI does now I believe they're kind of it's both, they're working with governments and the private sector, but initially yeah, I believe you're right that they kind of were dwelling in the private sector space first. So for us, yeah, this is our Published with a Purpose canvas, specifically for kind of governments looking to open up their data and their data problem or data issues. So yeah, it's a good note to
Yeah.
to
No,
jump on.
if you don't mind, maybe we can unpack this canvas a little bit. So there's a
Sure.
box.
Yeah.
There's a box here on that. Maybe we can start with what's the data challenge, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in your experience, what are like some of the top common data challenges that you would encounter that then would find its way into kind of an exercise like this?
So honestly, I don't feel like I'm the best person to speak on the usability of it. But something that we talked about before was that kind of even the low levels, right, challenges. I think, yeah, we can get very nitty gritty into it, and I would rather our director or someone more, uh, I guess, practiced in terms of using the canvas talk
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. I mean, just chiming out loud, like you have
Yeah.
items like citizen empowerment, economic
Yes.
opportunity. I mean, even in the Philippines, we
Mhm.
encounter. I mean, these are day-to-day problems. I mean, maybe I'll rephrase it. Maybe one thing that,
Mm.
well, I don't think it's a maybe. I really believe this, but I think um, people don't necessarily equate open data with solving social issues directly.
Right.
Like you can talk about things like easing traffic, something like that's
Mm.
that's kind of a universal problem
Yes.
in the Philippines, Metro Manila especially.
Yes.
uh, and you start asking for, do we have traffic statistics, or do we have
Right.
like mobility information on cars?
Hmm.
And the transport advocates will be the first to tell you there isn't one, or that data isn't even being gathered. I
Yes.
mean, up until the pandemic, I think the best data set you could get was more of like statistics on MRT ridership along EDSA, right?
Wow. Mm.
And even on that data set, people could in a way infer that there is a big problem, because you could already tell, like, hey, most of the passengers kind of come in at either North Avenue or Cubao Station, and then
Mm.
they disembark either at the Ayala Station or Taft Station. And you have all of these middle stations that are barely being serviced, because by the time the train hits them, it's already packed.
Mm.
So things
Yes.
like that, I mean, those are data, data challenges. I mean, if
Yes.
you can do some number crunching on kind of does it make sense to have like direct trips, like maybe apart from the regular trains, maybe you can set up special lines that go from one station directly to another.
Mhm.
It's like a point to point bus. There's a
Oh,
concept
yes.
like that. Yeah. I mean, all of this could have been the product of data analysis if the data was available.
Yes.
I mean, all we have are like general conjectures, like, hey, look, most people will live in Quezon City, and then they'll work in Makati, and that's where the trouble starts. And even concepts like, do we still advocate central business districts as a concept?
Mm.
Because
Right.
that's an idea we borrowed from the US, like
Right.
Los Angeles, San Francisco. But the way the geography of the Philippines is, like, if you can visualize a map, Metro Manila is kind of like in a bottleneck in Luzon. It's in a very, very small patch of land, and it's bordered by Manila Bay and mountains, no? So it's very hard to be packing everyone into that central location, as opposed
Yeah.
to if you have like a CBD maybe in Pampanga, where you have vast swaths of land on both directions. But we decided to create our CBD traditionally where the capital is, and
Yes.
and that's why it gets really congested. I mean, you could argue that intuitively, but then if you had bona fide data sets on, okay, traffic flow, cars, buses, then you could prove it. Like, hey, look, if we had just relocated this chunk of people or moved the offices out of the central business district and moved them closer to the residential areas, or like now, all it took was a virus to force everyone to work from home. And suddenly, well, I'm not saying traffic is a thing of the past, but it's no longer the excuse for people not showing up on time.
Although in the Philippines, we are infamous, notorious is the word for our traffic. No, 100%. I think getting into the open data space kind of, my soul is Filipino. So I have very, very, yeah, I feel for the Philippines. I'm always thinking about the Philippines in terms of what could be better, and as a new citizen, as a citizen of Singapore, it is really difficult not to compare, right? How a data-driven country could look like. So Singapore as an example, and a country like the Philippines, where a lot of things and corruption, let's say, corruption has really affected the infrastructure, or what could be, right? So 100%, I think, and that's why it's still so kind of important to talk about what data is, what does open data mean, and the importance of all that, in terms of just, I guess, general education, and not advocating, as a representative of from anywhere, but just kind of promoting that knowledge that infrastructure is important, right? That uh, to be a government official isn't just you show up and you have a budget and it's easy. No.
And you're supposed to spend that budget no matter
Yes,
what.
yes, and I'm now speaking as a former citizen of the Philippines, knowing how certain elections and officials are elected. It isn't that easy, and I think you know still being connected to citizens and getting them involved, and kind of helping them to understand what data is and how it can be used to improve citizens' lives, right? Not even, let's not talk about injustice on a, on a very kind of difficult level, just in terms of traffic, which was what you're saying here in Singapore. If I'm not wrong, some of the first few open data projects were like bus apps, right? And the reason why that can happen is that the data was available, right? And that there was an infrastructure that allowed any citizen to know, oh, this bus is now coming along onto this road and we can track it by, again, a certain infrastructure. But unfortunately, and now speaking in terms of inequality and just, I guess, poor infrastructures and governments that are not honoring their citizens or kind of upholding their rights and just thinking about them, again, even on a convenience level. I think there's a lot to be done. So 100%, I even coming in to open data, I was so overwhelmed with what the possibilities were, what could it mean. But I think the positive thing is that there's definitely upskilling in general and more consciousness about what data and open data does, accelerated by COVID, right? And the different measures and not only preparedness and just like the information available COVID wise. Open data has kind of been at the forefront of those conversations, but still for citizens to know its power, I think there's a lot. And I think, that's where Data Ethics Philippines and organizations like Open Data Charter can help, like really kind of educate and
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just being conscious of
How was
time.
that? I don't know if that was rambly.
No, that was perfect. I wanted to ask you two more things.
Yes.
And well, first is, can we talk about how do people get involved? Like, do you have like links for them to use? And
Oh,
are there
yes.
any coming events you want to share so people can participate
Yes,
in your activities?
100%. So we actually are, and maybe I could, no, I don't have anything to share, but we will be speaking at MozFest. We're very excited to speak at MozFest. The dates I might get wrong, so I will kind of chime in the chat when that is, but we are presenting one of our case studies on pay equity. In particularly focusing in Buenos Aires. We have like a case study and we'll be discussing the results of that. We also have our implementation working group sessions, which happen monthly. At the point of this recording, it's actually later, like early tonight. That's also why Dominic has not been able to join us. It's super early. Sometimes I'm not able to join, but early in the morning, or rather early morning, Singapore, Philippine time. So yeah,
Super early, like 2 a.m., right?
yes,
2 a.m., 1 a.m.
exactly. That's our implementation working group. We are going to try and record them more though. So you can head to our social media pages. We're on YouTube, Open Data Charter, as well as Twitter, where we're most active. And of course, LinkedIn. Slowly, we're building that network. But Twitter would be your direct access to us. It will be me behind the keyboard if you need to reach out. So yes. opendatacharter.org as well.
All right, cool. And thanks for that. Well, what we'll probably do is flash a lot of those links on the chat so that people can chime in. One more thing.
Yes.
So you've been with Open Data Charter and you see kind of the opportunity, you see the risks. Maybe addressing the Philippines in particular, since most of our audience is in the Philippines.
Yes.
I mean, maybe help us paint the picture. What would the Philippines look like if we had really good open data from your perspective?
Oh my gosh. I did bigla na umiyak. Honestly, whenever I do talk about the Philippines, super soft spot, it's easy to get angry, right? And that be but I'm actually, and I know it's very different now that I'm away, but maybe because of that distance, I can see possibility more clearly, and I still want it. I think some of the misconceptions about leaving a former birth country is that but you're fine now, so you don't care, right? Or that you don't, you can't chime in because no, now you're concentrated on that new city of yours or country of yours. Just leave us alone. But for me, I am still very much connected. If not for the pandemic, I go back at least twice a year. And so open data, in terms of, I guess, painting the picture of what a really beautiful Philippines where open data is thriving, would be starting with the communities that you've made amazing, more conversations about what open data can do in terms of, we have very amazing new young civil servants, right, who we can tap on, hopefully, and kind of discuss and introduce open data to. I'm not going to name names, but I know there are amazing, brilliant minds. I would see them again being advocates for it, taking it up, across the region, cities, and that again, that's a very big picture, but I would just want more knowledge about what it can do, and maybe even starting in terms of traffic. So let's start small, but I see that it can be done. I know there are already so many open data projects, mapping, right? I think there's an open data mapping organization, I believe, that's based in or like with a lot of Filipinos involved.
Are you referring to OpenStreetMap?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Yeah. See, so for me, that is already leaps and bounds. I think giving up is where many kind of no. For me, let's start one step at a time, and collaborating, discussions like this, spaces like this, and then amazing volunteer-led projects that get bigger. And I'm so excited about your project that will upskill our people, public servants, everybody. What's it called again?
Project Sparta. Actually,
Project Sparta.
there is that other project that we're involved in directly. Maybe I'll show it because it's still ongoing right now. I mean, regular viewers of data ethics would be familiar with this. So this is actually an open data project, the BARM Data Challenge.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if Open Data Charter is familiar with the history of this. So anyway, long story short, so BARM is it's the Bangsamoro region in Mindanao. And way back in 2016, 2015, 2017, thereabouts, several organizations collaborated with the ARMM government to put together an open data set. It's called the Open Bangsamoro data set, and we have those data sets here, right? So there's one for Open Bangsamoro, one for Open Marawi, all sorts of stuff, maps, demographic statistics, education, road quality, you name it. So it's just sitting in one, Google Drive for anyone to use, which is for me kind of a break in pattern, if you don't mind me saying, for the Philippines in general.
Oh, yes.
Where open data is, still a challenge. But then here you have an area in Mindanao. Suddenly they have one. And so what we did here, way back in 2019, when we were just forming data ethics, we decided to do a data challenge, kind of like a hackathon. And we didn't expect it to go far the first time we did it. We said, hey, look, here's some data. Tell us what you can do with it. And I actually have the GitHub link here. It yielded, more than 20 really, really nice prototypes. And we awarded 3 teams. One team was looking at, they did a research paper / dashboard on why people are dropping out of, 4th grade in BARM, that kind of thing. Another group, they looked at visualizing road quality. Another person superimposed data that he got from the US Geological Survey, so earthquakes and tremors. Superimposed it on the map of the BARM, and then identified highly prone areas for earthquakes and tsunamis.
Yeah.
And that was like just opened up the eyes of everyone. And so we were very inspired by that. So we awarded that. We decided to rerun the challenge 1 year later, approximately October 2020. It's still ongoing now. It's about to end sometime in March. And so that's this website. And we're really pleasantly surprised that we've more than doubled the number of prototypes that actually were submitted. So hopefully,
There you go.
the best ones really get awarded. And now, and talking about some of the stuff you mentioned, these were the thematic areas that the BARM government identified as something they'd like to solve using open data, like education,
Yeah.
moral governance, of course, poverty, and COVID. So
Mm.
it's very similar to stuff I've been hearing from you earlier. So there's really, in a way, a clamor for it. But yeah, it's in pockets. I think that's the challenge. So it's in
Yes.
pockets. It needs a concerted effort of everyone to pitch in. And
Yes.
yeah, who knows? I'd love to put them in touch with Open Data Charter. I mean,
Yes,
obviously,
please.
like I know you're talking to like national government already, but the BARM is another totally
Local.
another area
Yeah.
altogether that you guys should get involved in for sure.
For sure. We actually, so that's the thing that I can highlight. We actually talk to local governments as well. And that's part of the whole kind of recognizing context, right? There's some governments that are more, that I would say have higher capacity, more capacity to talk, to discuss things on a national level. But then there are some, initiatives of um, uh, kind of led by certain departments again, or like certain cities. So no, happy to talk to everyone. Yeah, please do put it. And that's what, this is already hopeful for me. This is what a good, I couldn't ask for anything more, honestly, in terms of open data development in the Philippines. Knowing that there are people like you, and that there are organizations and kind of initiatives like BARM, I'm already excited and happy about that. Yeah. Philippines, that's great first steps, I would say.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, hopefully it catches fire. That's I think the hope is that it snowballs into something really and really big.
we'll do
Uh,
that. We
yeah.
will tweet about it. Let's firestorm.
Yeah, maybe once the competition is done, you can help us propagate the winners because
Happy to. Yeah.
last year's winners were also resource speakers for this year, and
Ah,
they're some of them are like young professionals, barely a year out of university, and they've just put their minds and hearts into, hey, look, we want to solve the problems in BARM, give us some data to play with, and then we're going to do it. In fact, in this round, we said we're not limiting the entries to like techie
mm,
projects. If you want to do some data journalism, like write an article or a story backed by the data you find, go crazy, write those stories. If you want to do some videos, by all means.
mm,
Of course, fair apps and data visualizations are definitely fair game. If you want to do some bots, chat bots, anything, right?
yeah.
And I think that's what like open innovation is all about. Of course, it's not so much an open data problem, but I think there's a kind of a parallel issue as well, which we're trying to address in data ethics, is the way we do R&D, the way we do innovation in,
Hmm.
let's say, in the Philippines.
Yes.
It's such a bottleneck. If you wanted to get a grant for your projects, I'm speaking from experience. You have
Yes.
to you have to go through a school, and they have their own bureaucracy. Even if you have like a fairly decent idea, and again,
Mm,
it's part of, if you're in a startup, it's one of those challenges. But not everyone has kind of the stomach to kind of set up a company and take a risk, right? What if it's a government employee, just has a
mm,
smart idea, but
yeah.
can't progress it because no one will give you the light of day, is the problem.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think funding is still uh, funding for open data projects, and that is still part of the challenge. We actually do have a climate action grant that we're giving. I will share the link when we're chatting, but yeah, it's $1,000. It's not super big, but I believe that's open to all, supported by the UK government.
That's great.
Yeah,
Any
I think
money is is welcome.
Yeah.
Especially we like, even in the BARM data challenge, we had a fair amount of people who are coming in who are college students or high school
Mm,
graduates, and they want to give this data thing a shot. And yeah, and $1,000 can go a long way if you're trying to put together a nice prototype or presentation, and just
I
to
agree.
encourage people.
Yes, and domain fees even covered. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's called the Net Zero Challenge. But yeah, I'll share the link somewhere. And yeah, I'm just so happy that yeah, that there is a kind of movement towards this, just pushing for open data, and also consciousness about, I guess, even the the sustainability of these projects, right? I think that now in a lot of the conversations we're having, it's not just an idea, but what can that idea translate into, or can a government agency adopt it, right? Or and I think that is very much in line with how we think, kind of that circular circular thinking.
Yeah. The virtuous cycle, as they call it,
Yes.
not the
Yes.
vicious cycle.
No, the virtuous, correct.
Okay. So maybe Kat, a few takeaways before we adjourn. I mean, it's really been a pleasure having you on board, and hopefully we have you again. Anything you want to leave behind for the audience, or any thoughts that you'd like to leave behind with them?
I think in terms of just speaking to my fellow kababayans, it is that any effort we put into progress is effort. I really, and that's on a personal level, not just open data charter, but small steps are everything. A step is something, right? It's not. I think often we get disheartened, and especially in the development space, right? It's a very talk about burnout always occurs, but just hold strong, and yeah, every step matters. What you're doing matters. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking from the people who have interacted with us, even in data ethics,
Mm.
I'm really encouraged by the idealism I see, especially with I mean, millennials run the world now, right? Millennials aren't that young anymore, but I'm really
No.
encouraged by the Gen Z, and uh, they just have this idealism that, hey, look, if it's a problem, why can't we fix it? I mean, I like the
That's
way
true.
they just start with no barriers. Like
Yes. Yes.
I'm tail end Gen X, so I'm used to
Right.
thinking in terms of, hey, look, we have all these issues, concerns, conditions,
Yes.
but Gen Z don't have those, and
They don't.
I'm really really encouraged that it's that kind of thinking we need. Like think
100.
from scratch. Let's re-engineer this. Open data
100%.
is one of those things. Like, we have to just remove all the barriers.
Exactly. Openness, right? Again, that we could leave with that principle of openness and being open by default.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Kat. All the best with Open Data Charter, and looking forward to linking up with you and your group. And yeah, I'll put you in touch with both the data ethics community and the Analytics Association of the Philippines. I mean, I'm sure they'll be very encouraged. And maybe we can do a joint project soon.
That would be great. Thank you, Dominic.
So yeah, thanks again. And that's been
This is
another
so great.
edition of Data Ethics Conversations. Tune in again next time for another great guest. And yeah, so catch you again in the next conversation.